We're speaking to Professor Dr. Danny Wong, who is a professor and dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences in UM. Thank you so much, Professor, for speaking to us on the Light Breakfast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Professor, we know you were born in Sabah. So can you tell us a little bit more about your growing up years there?
Well, I was born in Kota Kinabalu when it was still called Jesselton. So a few months before the name was changed to Kota Kinabalu. And we are KK folks. My family, we are from KK. But because my father was in the police force, and therefore we follow him around. And so the first few years of my life was spent in this little town called Tenom. So Tenom is the end of the railway, the only railway line, main railway line in Sabah. And so we stay in that town for 5 years. And that town is actually an interior town. So let's say if you want to eat fish, then you only have fish from the river or from the pond. Later on, we move on when my father was transferred to East Coast. That's Tawau. That's the port town of Tawau. So again, when we eat fish, then now we have a lot of plenty of seafood. So the diet changed in that sense. Yeah. But later on, when my father moved back to KK, I grew up spending my teenage years in Kota Kinabalu, and until I came over to study at UM, and then later on stay on to work in KL. So basically, what the kind of impression about Sabah that I have would be things that I went through when I was a younger person. So subsequently, I visited Sabah more rather than staying there. Yeah. So today maybe I'm more of a KL person than anywhere else. Yeah. So Sabah for me is a very nice place to grow up. It has a great deal of people are warm, very warm there, and they still uphold a great deal of the old values, things like mutual respect, humility, very kind people, and also very cheerful. So it's a good place to grow up, actually, at least for me.
Well, you grew up all over Sabah. You were in the interior, and then you went to the port, and then you went back to the city. What were some of the best memories that you've had growing up in that state?
Well, I suppose it's, if you ask me, of course, we always feel that Sabah is a very beautiful place. So where I was in KK, my house was just 10 minutes away from the beach. So you can go for a swim, you can walk along the beach, and that's 10 minutes. 30 minutes can get you to a crystal clear river.
Nice.
45 minutes, you will end up at the park office of the Kinabalu mountain, Mount Kinabalu.
Wow.
And that's one of the most beautiful places on earth, if you like. So it's a nice place to be if you like nature. And of course, growing up there, you get to see a diverse kind of people. We are very proud to say that we have at least 32 groups of ethnic or sub-ethnic groups and so on. So mixed marriages is a very common thing. So like, for instance, in my family, we do have a lot of although I'm a Chinese of fourth generation, but then we have in the family people from Bajau background. We have first cousins who are Brunei Malays. We have Kadazan and so on. So it's a very different kind of place. So coming over was a different world altogether in that sense. Yeah, but
Culture shock when you got here in KL.
Kind of culture shock, because growing up there means you're quite mixed, actually. You mix around, a great deal of diversity. Of course, that word was not in our vocabulary until when I came over to study. Then we were, oh, that means diverse, actually. But it was very kind of diverse kind of place. So if you ask me, those are the things that I cherish most, actually.
those, I mean, for you, diversity was just everyday life. You just lived that way, right?
Oh yeah, very much. I mean, in a way that I still remember that kind of impression that we had when One Malaysia was Satu Malaysia was introduced. We thought that's a very old term because we have been living like that for as long as we could remember.
Yeah.
When was the last time you went back to Sabah, though? How often do you do?
I do go back something like 4 or 5 times a year. But,
Oh,
of course, this year has been quite exceptional. So this year, after Chinese New Year, we had a bit of a book launch. That's about just about 2 weeks before the lockdown. So twice this year. So that was in February.
all right.
Yeah.
What's the first thing you do every time you get back to Sabah?
Well, apart from saying hello to my old folks and the food always go back to that kind of food. The local food quite different among the Chinese. Of course, it has a great deal of Hakka food because Hakka being the largest group of Chinese dialect over there. So you have Yong Tiu Fu, Yong Dao Fu over here.
Yeah.
You have a lot of Yuk Yuan Chun Yuan, meaning to say this kind of spring roll plus meatball. And we eat a lot of beef actually over there rather than say people here don't eat beef.
Actually, on that, I know a lot of Sabah people and have a lot of Sabah friends. Nobody can seem to agree on where's the best new chap place in Sabah.
For me, that is in Megata.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but of course, yeah, nobody seems to be able to. Meat up means it's a mix of trips and plus all this internal organ,
Yeah.
meat of the of the cow. Yeah. So it's yeah, I do agree. We can't agree. Yeah.
Now, Professor, tell us what got you interested in history, like how this interest became your career today.
Well, I suppose if you come to Sabah and spend some time in KK or even other towns, for instance, you will find that history is a very important part of our life. By saying that, I mean, every year we do have certain what we call events to commemorate certain events of the past. Like for instance, in January 21st, you have this commemoration service at the Pitagas War Memorial, where they commemorate a group of guerrillas, local guerrillas who fought against the Japanese in 1943. And so that was that. Every time you have that ceremony, the press will carry stories about survival, about families, and so on. And after that, you have the annual Anzac Day, Australian and New Zealand Day, where you have the POWs, prisoners of war, allied prisoners of war, who were kept in Sanakan and then later on were forced to march to Ranau on a death march. So out of the 2,000 over people, only 6 survived the war actually. So that itself, that event itself is very much a part of our state calendar in commemorating the past. In June, we have the June 66 tragedy, where we lost Tun Fort Stephen and half of his cabinet in 1976. So that again, every time you have this event, then there will be newspaper reports about this event and so on to commemorate. So history is in a way quite thick in the sense in a place like Sabah. Then of course I mentioned about the press. You know, in Sabah we have a lot of newspapers. So apart from the national newspapers, we have the local papers like Daily Express, Sabah Times, Borneo Post, also in Chinese language like Overseas Chinese Daily and so on. Now, I don't know for whatever reason, but then every time you have something historical to commemorate, they would have newspaper articles on those events. There are also weekly columns by different people writing about the past as well. So the past is actually quite alive in that sense, in the minds of local people. And also in some of these press papers, you also have the state archives and also the state museum, having a column, a weekly column, putting out news of the past. And again, that sort of invoke, if not reinforce, that kind of idea about the past. But therefore, if you pay attention to things around you, I think you will inevitably turn out to be a history buff in some ways, But personally, I think I may have been influenced by my father, who talked a lot about the past, about the family's past and things like that, because my grandfather was in the guerrilla. He was the medic of the guerrilla. And so we didn't know what happened to him and how did he die and things like that. Of course, we knew where he died and so on. There were stories about him. So again, there was this idea, that we wanted to find out more and so on. So in that sense, I got interested in history, perhaps through that manner. Yeah.
Because you wanted to find out more about your grandfather.
To some extent. Of course, curiosity has always been something important in our pursuit of academic what you call investigation and so on. So that itself also prompted people, or at least for me, to actually try to find out more about the past, try to make sense of things actually.
Okay. Has Sabah changed from when you were born to today?
Of course. Great deal of development, a lot of new development, better facilities. There used to be a gap between East and, at least in Sabah, compared to, say, KL facilities. All these will be very much lacking and so on. So today we still find that those basic facilities lacking. Like, for instance, you have this poor girl who has to climb the tree to get the...
Viviana,
Viviana, yeah. So, I mean, that itself tells you something about what you call the kind of situation that we have. But things have improved a great deal, I think. So development is definitely one of the things that we look at. But also, I think, increasingly, we also began to be a bit more, what you call, the sense of being a Malaysian, the identity, also growing quite well in that sense. Because we came in differently, we came from a different background. We came in as a state called North Borneo or Sabah, so that identity itself was quite strong. As you probably would have imagined when you met some of the people from Sabah or Sarawak, that sense of us being Sabahan or Sarawakian would be very strong. But over the years, I think people have begun to understand that we are part of Malaysia, the greater Malaysia, and that the interaction, the people who went over to study or came over to study, or people who came over to work, stay on to work, I think there must be at least 200,000 Sabahans or equal number of Sarawakians in West Malaysia. Yeah. And by the same token, a lot of West Malaysians are also found themselves in KK or in other parts of Sabah, being students in, say, UMS or some of the UITM campuses over there, as well as the teachers and the government servants who went over to work, or businessmen who went over for greener pastures and so on. So in that sense, I think that interactions has increased by a great deal. So the sense of coming together as Malaysians and so on would be much stronger. So that's the kind of changes that I could see. But of course, coming back to the basic things about ethnicity and so on, I think there is also an increasing polarization, if you like, that has, you can see that as well. But generally, things are changing. I mean, I've been here for 30 years, so surely that a lot of things must have changed over the years.
Yeah. Okay. Now, earlier you said Sabah was previously known as North Borneo, right? Why did they change the name? And what does the name Sabah actually mean? Does it mean anything?
Well, I don't think we can pin down the actual meaning of Sabah, but then the name itself is not new. It's not something that was cooked up in 1963, where we changed the name of the state from North Borneo or British North Borneo to Sabah. The idea of Sabah has been there. If you look at some of the old documents, as when the British arrived, they realized that the people in certain parts of the state or this territory at that time were, call themselves people from Sabah, or this is the Negeri Sabah. They have this notion that this place is called Sabah, but perhaps not every part of Sabah was called Sabah. But then there was such notion. And then in the treaty signed between the Europeans or the British with the locals and so on, you find the term Maharaja Sabah was also being used and so on. So the term has been there. But it was not used over the years. In fact, if I remember correctly, there was even a governor, a British governor, who felt that we should not use the term, should not popularize the term Sabah during that period of British rule. But then in 1950s, when this notion of colonization began to take place, where the British said, well, it's time for us to leave. Maybe it's time to cultivate and nurture a new identity for the people in this state. So what the term that they chose was Sabah. So you have Radio Sabah being introduced as early as 1952. When, so Radio Sabah has been there. It was not called Radio North Borneo, it was called Radio Sabah. We also have the Sabah Times as a newspaper. We also have later part, we also find that the term has been used for Sabah College. There was the first government secondary school started by the British. It was not called North Borneo College, but it was called Sabah College. So in that sense, that the identity, that what you call that, the name of the state has been sort of decided in that manner. So when we joined Malaysia, or when we became part of Malaysia, the name was changed from North Borneo to the only name that seems to be appropriate, that's Sabah. So that's how we ended up having Sabah actually.
But Professor, can you tell us more about the merger between Sabah, Sarawak, Singapore and Malaya to form Malaysia, especially from Sabah's point of view? What led to this merger?
I think if we all remember, the merger came from, it was brought about by Tunku's announcement on May 27, 1961. So he said that we should bring the states together to form a greater federation. Now, of course, a lot of this was prompted by the British feeler that they put out, saying that, look, it's time for us to withdraw from these colonies and so on. So what is the most logical step to be taken? So a merger of these former British territories would be a kind of logical steps to be taken. So that was floated in 1961. But if you remember, the initial reaction was not very forthcoming. People were hostile, if you may. People like the leaders of the state, like Donald Stevens, who later became Dunbar Stevens, was dead against it, the idea. A lot of his supporters and also a lot of the local leaders felt that we should not join at that point of time, because it is better for us to wait for a few years, achieve independence, then we can negotiate for better terms and things like that to join. This is, I think this kind of thinking was based on the idea that we should basically protect the interests of the state and also the people. So that was that's where they come from in that sense. But then later on, I think it was made clear to them by the British that this is a fait accompli, where it has to be done regardless of what. The British has to leave, and therefore it will come to pass regardless of what you may think at that point of time. And I think Donald Stevens and other leaders were also influenced to some extent by their interaction with Lee Kuan Yew, the leader of Singapore, who explained to them that actually it is something that you cannot avoid. So I think Then they were brought over to take a look at the peninsula changes that were taking place over here, and I think they were quite convinced that it is the right thing to do. So that's how we came into this notion about becoming part of this greater federation of Malaysia. Yeah.
Why was it so important for the British to
Piece us
make
together.
sure this merger happens?
Well, I suppose there is a sense of responsibility on the British side. If you want to leave, you want to leave in a proper manner. So what is the best course of action? For a state like Sabah at that point of time to stand on its own, I think it will be rather difficult. It doesn't have security, it doesn't have the armed forces. It wasn't rich at the time. It didn't have a large population. So I don't think we would survive as a single entity, so on. So the logical thing to do was to bring all these together and then form under one umbrella. So the expanded Federation of Malaysia. Of course, there have been idea that Tunku wanted Sabah and Sarawak as well in order to balance the Chinese, the huge number of Chinese who are coming in through Singapore when Singapore became part of Malaysia. So this is to balance in terms of ethnicity and so on. So that is another notion about we all coming together. So yeah, there are a lot of this story itself can actually turn out to be a book. Quite a lot of things to talk about.
I'm sure. Yeah. But what were some of the benefits that Sabah gained from joining Malaysia?
I think being part of the larger nation, a larger entity, federation, it's by itself, it's already a benefit. So you have a lot of resources, you have security, you have armed forces being protected. That itself is a very important part of this being part of Malaysia. But also the shared development, the shared experience, culture, and so on, diversity that has increased greatly over the years. I think that those are some of the benefits. And of course, education, we have access to education, access to quite a lot of other things. Of course, not everyone would agree with such statement, but I think at least for me, those are at least some of the things that the people from Sabah would have benefited.
Professor, what's your message to all Malaysians this Malaysia Day?
I think it has been 57 years since we joined Malaysia, or became part or helped to form Malaysia, depending on how a lot of Sabahans will say it differently. But it has been 57 years being part of this greater nation of Malaysia. But one of the things that I think, personally, I feel that we have not come to know each other that well. At least not well enough. There have been instances where people like us coming from the other side were greeted like, "Welcome to Malaysia." So I mean, that's not acceptable at all. I mean, we are part of Malaysia. We are very much integral part of Malaysia. So the challenge of nation building before us is enormous. So we really need to actually come together to be united, to have a common aspirations in order to fulfill the aspirations of the founding fathers. They had a motion, they have a vision back in 1963. So what the nation of Malaysia should be. And I think we have to work hard together to actually move towards that. And we cannot achieve that than to actually work together, get to know each other better and so on. So then perhaps what better way to get to know each other better than to visit each other. So we do hope more people from Semenanjung or from Sarawak can drop by Sabah to enjoy the kind of beauty that we have over there, and also to savor the kind of food and you chop maybe. Yeah. So basically, I feel that we should have more interaction.
All right, that's great. Yeah, and decide for yourself finally where has the best new chap.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
I will go. I love Sabah. Actually, yeah, I will definitely
Yeah.
be there.
Well, thank you so much, Professor, for speaking to us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, thank you.